On a cold, rainy morning, inside Lakeside Memorial Hospital, the air was filled with the low hum of machines and the weary murmur of voices as it always did, until the automatic doors hissed open. A German shepherd staggered in, drenched, bleeding, carrying on his back an unconscious 3-year-old boy with a small wooden arm. No one knew who they were, where they came from, or what had happened. No one moved, not even the nurses. The world seemed to stop breathing. The dog stumbled once, then lay down, curling his body around the boy as if to guard his final breath. "Help him," a nurse whispered. "Please, help him." And that was the moment it all began, when secrets long buried began to surface. Stay till the end, because what followed was more than a rescue. It was an awakening, a quiet miracle that taught those who had lost faith to believe again, to find light and meaning in life once more. Before we begin, don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe. And truly, I'm curious where you are watching from. Drop your country name in the comment. I'd love to know how far our stories reach. The rain had been falling since dawn, not in fury, but in that steady, relentless way that seeps into everything, softening edges and stealing color from the world. The asphalt outside Lakeside Memorial glistened under the gray light, a mirror to the sky's sorrow. Inside, the hospital hummed in its usual rhythm. The whir of ventilators, the low murmur of exhausted nurses, the occasional chime of a monitor. Nothing extraordinary. Just another cold Monday morning. Then the automatic doors opened with a hiss, and the world seemed to hold its breath. He appeared out of the storm, a German shepherd, soaked to the bone, limping heavily, his fur matted with mud and streaked with blood. His chest rose in uneven bursts, each breath shallow and strained. His eyes, dulled by exhaustion, flickered with something else. Not fear, not confusion, but a kind of desperate purpose. Across his back lay a small boy, no older than 3, his frail body curled within a torn gray sweater. One sleeve hung empty. The other ended in a crude wooden prosthetic, swinging with each of the dog's labored steps. No one spoke. A nurse near the counter froze mid-motion, her pen hovering above a chart. Another dropped a cup of coffee that shattered against the tile, the splash echoing louder than it should have. Even the ticking clock seemed to hesitate. The dog staggered forward another few feet before stopping. The air around him carried the faint metallic scent of rain, mud, and blood. The smell of survival and pain. His tail hung low, soaked and heavy, his legs trembling with the effort to remain standing. The boy on his back didn't stir. His head lolled to one side, lips pale, lashes wet. For one terrible second, everyone in that hallway thought he was gone. Then a faint exhale, barely there, fragile as mist. A woman moved first. Nurse Evelyn Hart, mid-40s, tall and deliberate, her auburn hair pulled back into a low bun that revealed the deep lines carved by years of loss she never spoke of. She wore an old wedding ring on a chain around her neck and eyes that had seen too many nights like this one. But never this. She set down her clipboard, knelt slowly, and extended both hands toward the dog, palms open, her voice barely above a whisper. No one could hear what she said, but the tone alone was enough to calm the air. The shepherd's gaze met hers. It was the kind of look that erases the distance between species. Cautious, yes, but filled with something raw and human. Trust born from exhaustion. His front legs buckled first, then the back. He sank to the floor with a soft whine, curling himself protectively around the boy as his own blood spread in a dark halo beneath him. The child slid from his back, limp, his cheek pressing against the cold tile. Evelyn reached out, trembling, and touched the side of the boy's neck. A pulse, faint, erratic, but there. She inhaled sharply, her chest tightening with the kind of hope that hurts. Around her, nurses began to stir. One whispered, "Oh my God." Another reached for the emergency button, the sound sharp against the stillness. Evelyn looked up only long enough to say, quietly but firmly, "Get a gurney, now." Her words snapped the room into motion. Footsteps pounded, doors swung open, voices overlapped, the mechanical music of emergency. The boy was lifted with practiced care, his body weightless in the flurry of hands. His sweater clung to him, drenched and torn. The dog shifted, lifting his head weakly, watching as they carried the child away. He tried to rise, one paw, then another, but his legs collapsed beneath him. Still, he crawled forward, claws scraping faintly against the tile. A nurse tried to stop him, but he didn't seem to hear. Every ounce of strength he had left belonged to that small, fading shape being rolled down the hall. The stretcher turned the corner, disappearing behind the red lettering of Trauma Bay 2. The doors swung shut. The sounds of ordered chaos rose from the other side. Beeping monitors shouted vitals, the rhythmic blur of urgency. In the hall, silence fell again. The shepherd dragged himself until his muzzle pressed against the glass window of the trauma room. His breath fogged the pain in small, uneven bursts. He didn't move, didn't blink, just watched the faint outlines of figures beyond the frosted surface. The floor beneath him was slick with water and blood, rain still dripping from his fur in slow, rhythmic beats. Someone whispered, "Whose dog is that?" No one answered. They all stood there, unsure whether they were witnessing an act of desperation or a miracle. Evelyn straightened slowly, her knees stiff from the cold tile. She looked down at the animal, at the wounds across his flank, the mud crusted into his paws, the way he still stared through the glass, as if sheer willpower could keep that child alive. Something in her chest ached with recognition, a pain that had been dormant for years. He hadn't wandered in, she realized. He had carried the boy here, through rain, through fear, through whatever hell lay behind them. Beyond the trauma doors, the monitors beeped in a fragile rhythm. Inside, life fought to stay. Outside, the nameless dog lay trembling in his own silence, a guardian unwilling to leave his post. And though no one knew it yet, that moment, that quiet intersection of devotion and despair, was the beginning of everything that would follow. When the stretcher disappeared from view, the dog pulled himself after it, ignoring the hands that tried to stop him. His claws scraped faintly across the tile, his shadow stretching long under the fluorescent lights. He reached the closed doors and pressed his body against them, breath shallow, eyes fixed on what he could no longer see. The hospital lights flickered once, and in that fleeting pulse of brightness, every person in that hallway understood. This animal hadn't come seeking rescue. He had come to deliver it. The rain had thinned to a whisper against the glass by the time morning settled over Lakeside Memorial. The storm that had once beaten against the windows now lingered only as a soft mist, blurring the streetlights and tracing silver lines down the panes. The hospital had grown quiet again, but not in peace. Rather, in that hollow kind of quiet that comes after something sacred has already passed through. Inside the ICU, the world reduced itself to gentle beeps, the rhythmic sigh of machines, and the faint hum of fluorescent light above a child's bed. The little boy they had saved was no longer a nameless face in an emergency room. They found a name sewn into the inside seam of his tattered gray sweater. Samuel. 3 letters, slightly uneven, stitched by hand in faded blue thread. Whoever had done it had done so with love, the kind of love that holds through winter nights. Samuel lay still beneath the thin hospital blanket, his skin pale with the fragile tint of candle wax. His small chest rose in shallow waves, his breath barely catching the air. There were faint bruises along his ribs, a fading mark near his temple, and tiny scratches that told stories of struggle no child should ever know. But it was the wooden arm, smooth, handmade, sanded and polished by someone who cared, that caught Evelyn's gaze again and again. She ran her thumb over its surface once, wondering what kind of person had carved it. What kind of tenderness it took to shape something so small, so precise for a boy who must have once laughed. Outside the ICU window, just beyond the sterile glow of the room, lay the German shepherd. He hadn't moved since dawn. His fur, still damp from the rain, clung to his ribs, and his flank rose only slightly with each breath. His eyes were open, unblinking, fixed on the child through the glass. Every time a nurse passed, he followed their movement, not out of fear, but out of vigilance, as if guarding something that still belonged to him. At one point, a young security guard, barely older than 20, broad-shouldered but uncertain, approached with a clipboard and hesitation in his voice. "Ma'am, animals aren't allowed in this section." He didn't finish. Evelyn turned to him, eyes red from exhaustion but steady, her voice low enough to carry weight. "If he goes, I go." The boy swallowed, nodded once, and left without another word. No one else tried again. Evelyn found a blanket in the supply closet, thin, scratchy, but clean, and brought it to the hallway where the dog lay. She crouched beside him, the scent of rain and antiseptic mingling in the air. His paws were torn, the pads raw and embedded with gravel. There was a jagged gash along his hind leg where the fur had matted with dried blood. She fetched warm saline, tweezers, and gauze, cleaning him with careful hands that trembled only when they brushed over his ribs. "You brought him here, didn't you?" she whispered, without expecting an answer. The dog blinked once, slow and deliberate. It was not the blink of confusion, but of understanding. And in that single motion, something passed between them, a quiet acknowledgement that both of them had already lost too much to turn away now. The day drifted on in a hush that carried its own kind of gravity. Doctors came and went, whispering terms that sounded clinical but helpless: exposure, trauma, severe hypothermia. Yet the bruises on Samuel's arms, the marks around his wrists, told Evelyn there was more to the boy's story than the storm. When she asked the attending physician, a tired man with deep lines under his eyes, he only sighed and said, "He's stable for now. That's all we can promise." Hours passed like that. Light fading, monitors pulsing, the scent of rain gave way to the sterile chill of the night shift. Evelyn stayed by the window, her hand resting gently on the shepherd's fur, feeling the faint warmth beneath her palm. Every now and then, the dog's ears twitched at distant sounds: the rattle of a gurney, the click of shoes, the far-off hum of the generator. But his gaze never left the boy. It was as if his heartbeat depended on Samuel's. Somewhere around midnight, Evelyn leaned back against the wall, exhaustion pulling at her shoulders. She thought of the wooden arm again, the faded stitches of the name, the silent devotion of the creature beside her. A soldier, she thought. Not the kind who fights in wars, but the kind who carries what's left when the battle is over. She reached out and brushed the dog's head softly. "You're a soldier," she murmured, "and soldiers don't give up." It was the first time she'd seen his tail move, a faint, tired thump against the floor, almost like gratitude. The sound was so small, yet it filled the empty corridor more completely than any voice could. She looked down at him for a long moment, the corners of her lips softening into the hint of a smile. "You need a name," she said quietly, the words half to herself. "I can't just keep calling you boy." Her eyes lifted toward the misted glass, where Samuel slept under the pale glow of machines. "You've earned one, haven't you?" The silence lingered for a few seconds, and then gently, as if the name had always been waiting there, she whispered, "Max." The name hung in the air, simple and strong. The shepherd stirred slightly, his eyes shifting toward her, and for the first time since he'd entered that hospital, something alive flickered behind them, something like belonging. The night grew deeper. The nurses changed shifts. Lights dimmed along the corridor. Evelyn remained seated on the cold tile, her back against the wall, half asleep but unwilling to leave. Beyond the window, the town was nothing but mist and blurred lamps, and inside, the rhythm of machines lulled everything into a fragile stillness. Then, at 2 a.m., the stillness cracked. Max lifted his head suddenly, his ears snapping upright. His body, moments ago limp with exhaustion, tensed like a drawn bow. His gaze darted toward the ICU room, muscles trembling. For a breath, there was only silence. Then, faintly, the heart monitor's steady beep faltered. A flat note cut through the quiet, sharp as a blade. Before the alarm lights began to flash, before anyone else even understood what had happened, Max was already on his feet. His claws scraped against the floor as he lunged toward the glass, eyes locked on the small figure in the bed beyond. The world that had been silent all night suddenly erupted in sound. Voices shouting, footsteps running, machines crying for help. And amid it all, the shepherd stood rigid in the hallway, chest heaving, ears forward, watching, waiting, as if his heart refused to stop until the child's did not. By the time dawn returned to Lakeside Memorial, the rain had faded into a gray drizzle. The light that crept through the hospital windows was pale and uncertain, like a hand hesitant to touch what it didn't yet understand. In the ICU, the soft beeping of the monitors steadied into a rhythm again. The boy, Samuel, had survived the night. His breathing was shallow, but even now, his body a map of bruises and silent answers. Outside the glass, Max lay curled near the door, eyes half open, as if standing guard against a world that had already done too much harm. When the day staff arrived, they found Evelyn sitting on the floor beside him, a cup of untouched coffee growing cold in her hand. She hadn't moved for hours. There was relief in the air, but also unease. No identification, no missing child alert. No one had come asking for a boy with a wooden arm. It was as if Samuel had fallen out of the world itself. By mid-morning, a man in a tan overcoat walked through the front entrance, his presence quiet but steady. Detective Raymond Cole, a retired Army veteran turned part-time investigator with the county sheriff's office. Late 50s, tall, weathered face framed by gray-streaked hair. His hands bore the calluses of a man who'd once lived by duty, but his eyes, blue and lined with old grief, softened the moment he saw the dog. Max lifted his head but did not move. Their eyes met in a silence that spoke of wars neither of them could forget. Raymond crouched slowly, one knee creaking against the tile. "You've seen it too, haven't you?" he murmured, though his voice barely broke the air. He didn't expect the dog to respond. But Max's gaze lingered on him, long enough for something unspoken to pass between them, the quiet recognition of shared loss. A nurse handed Raymond the initial report. No fingerprints, no records, no trace of the child anywhere in state or federal systems. The sheriff's office had already cross-checked missing persons lists. Nothing matched. "Someone loved that boy," Evelyn said softly, her thumb brushing the hem of Samuel's blanket. "But someone else hurt him." Raymond didn't reply. He just nodded once, the kind of nod that belongs to men who've learned to keep pain behind silence. By noon, he was in the hospital's security room, eyes fixed on the grainy footage from the previous night. The timestamp blinked 3:42 a.m. Through the static snow of the camera feed, a figure emerged from the tree line behind the hospital. 4 legs, soaked fur, carrying something across the rain-slicked field. A German shepherd, limping under the weight of a small body. He watched as the dog staggered toward the emergency bay, pushed through the automatic doors, and vanished inside. Raymond exhaled slowly, the sound caught somewhere between awe and disbelief. "He carried him all the way here," he said under his breath. Turning toward Evelyn, who had joined him, he added, quietly, "Whatever happened out there, that dog's the only witness we've got." The next call he made was to Josie Alvarez, a ranger with the State Forest Division. Late 30s, tall, strong-built, with dark hair tucked beneath a canvas cap. Her uniform smelled faintly of pine and campfire. She'd worked with Raymond before, back when the wild had its own share of mysteries. "You're saying a dog dragged a kid out of the woods?" she asked when she arrived, half skeptical, half intrigued. Raymond nodded. "And I think he's trying to show us where he came from." The 3 of them stood outside the hospital's back lot, where the mud still bore the faint prints of Max's paws. The rain had begun again, light but steady, and mist rolled off the forest beyond like breath from a sleeping giant. Raymond stepped forward, his boots sinking into the damp earth. Max followed, slow but purposeful, his nose low to the ground. Evelyn watched from the doorway as they disappeared into the fog. His gait was uneven, his bandaged leg trembling with each step. Raymond noticed, slowing his own pace. "He's weak," he murmured, voice low and rough. "But he wants to lead. Let him." Josie glanced at him, then at the dog, and said nothing. The rain softened the edges of their silence, turning it into something close to reverence. The forest swallowed sound the moment they entered. The air was thick and cool, scented with wet cedar and decay. Broken branches littered the path. Max moved with strange precision, limping but sure, weaving through undergrowth and puddles that mirrored the pale sky. Raymond trailed behind him, his hand brushing the revolver at his belt more from habit than fear. "He's not wandering," Josie said quietly. "He's tracking." After nearly an hour, they came upon a small clearing, a makeshift campsite half hidden beneath a stand of birch trees. The tarp was torn and sagging, one corner burned through. Nearby lay a rusted tin can, a child's blanket soaked and stiff with mud and blood. Raymond knelt, brushing away leaves with the back of his glove. "Someone left in a hurry," he muttered. Josie's flashlight beam caught something glinting beneath a flat stone. She lifted it carefully, a scrap of paper, damp but legible, the words written in shaky ink. "No going back." She glanced at Raymond, who said nothing. Beneath the note, half buried in the dirt, was a small wooden carving, the shape unmistakable. A dog, its edges worn smooth by small hands. Max stepped forward then, his nose hovering above the carving, breathing it in as if the scent itself spoke of ghosts. He sat down beside it and lowered his head, the movement slow, reverent, almost human. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was rain threading through the leaves, each drop heavy with memory. Raymond picked up the carving and turned it over in his palm. "Whoever made this," he said quietly, "didn't plan on coming back." They searched the area for nearly an hour more, marking footprints, tire tracks, and fragments of cloth caught on branches. But the trail ended where the mud turned to stone near the river's edge. Raymond stood there, rain soaking his hat, looking at the endless stretch of mist curling above the water. There was something about this place, something that felt unfinished. His radio crackled suddenly, static cutting through the rain. "Detective Cole, do you copy?" The voice was distant but urgent. He pressed the transmitter. "Go ahead." "Sir, we found a vehicle down near the East Riverbank. Looks like it's been burned out for a few days." Raymond's jaw tightened. "Anyone inside?" A pause, then, "Yes, sir. One occupant. Male. There's a badge." Raymond's pulse slowed, that kind of slow that comes before bad news. "Whose?" The answer came through faint but clear. "Name reads, Roy Beckett." The rain fell harder. Josie looked toward him, questions rising in her eyes. Raymond didn't speak. He just stared out across the river, the wooden carving still in his hand, the inked words echoing in his mind. No going back. And behind them, in the gray light and falling rain, Max stood silent, the rain running down his fur like tears that did not belong to him. The storm returned before the day could decide whether it belonged to light or darkness. Rain lashed against the hospital windows like hands demanding entry, and the air inside Lakeside Memorial thickened with that uneasy stillness that always comes before something breaks. In Raymond's office, the fluorescent light buzzed faintly as he scrolled through Beckett's old personnel records, a name that had surfaced too many times in the wrong places. Roy Beckett, former EMT, fired for negligence, a man who'd once been trusted with saving lives but had learned to sell them instead. The reports were scattered, sealed cases, whispers of missing files, families that moved away in silence. Domestic calls, hospital debts, child welfare flagged twice but never followed up, and a disciplinary note, faded with age. Unauthorized access to patient records. Raymond's stomach tightened. He'd seen this kind of pattern before, men who wore uniforms long after they'd stopped serving anything but themselves. He leaned back, the chair groaning beneath his weight, and stared at the photo clipped to the file. Beckett, years younger, in a hospital hallway, smiling with the hollow pride of someone who had learned how to fake decency. "You use the system to hunt," Raymond muttered. Outside, thunder rolled, the kind that didn't sound like weather but like warning. Down the corridor, Evelyn sat in the dim light of the ICU, one hand resting on the edge of Samuel's bed, the other absently brushing the fur between Max's ears. The boy's face was pale but peaceful, his chest rising and falling beneath the faint glow of the monitors. But Evelyn noticed something she couldn't explain. Each time the heart rate monitor spiked, Max stirred, his body tensing, eyes fixed on the flickering green line as if it were tethered to his own breath. Once, when Samuel's small hand twitched in a dream, Max pressed his nose gently to the glass, a low whine escaping him. It wasn't noise, it was recognition, an unspoken bridge between them. Evelyn whispered, barely audible, "You still know him, don't you?" Max's ears flicked once, the rain echoing softly against the window like a reply. Raymond appeared at her shoulder sometime after dusk, trench coat damp from the short walk across the lot. He didn't need to say why he was there. The expression on his face told her enough. He'd found something. He set the file down beside her coffee cup, the folder edges curling from moisture. "Roy Beckett," he said quietly. "Used to work for county EMS. Got access to hospital systems, kid records, schedules. Fired 8 years ago for falsifying reports." Evelyn's brows furrowed. "So that's how he knew about Samuel?" Raymond nodded. "He's done it before. Used forged medical forms to move kids. Made it look like transport transfers. Sold them to people who didn't care what names they answered to." He rubbed a hand over his jaw, the kind of motion that came with years of trying not to feel disgusted. "That badge we found wasn't random. And the flannel rope around the boy's chest? It's the same kind issued in EMT carry kits." The words hung in the air, heavier than the rain. Evelyn's gaze drifted back toward the glass. "And the dog?" she asked. Raymond exhaled slowly. "My guess. He got in the way." In another part of the hospital, the storm grew louder. The power flickered once, twice, a faint hum from the generators filling the silence between thunderclaps. The nurses moved quietly through the hall, shoes squeaking on polished tile, their eyes tired but kind. No one noticed the man who walked past them wearing scrubs that weren't hospital issue. His face was clean-shaven, his hair cropped short, the rain dripping from his collar. He moved with the kind of precision that pretended to belong. He passed security without a glance. Past the vending machines humming near the waiting area. Past a wall of photographs showing the staff of Lakeside Memorial smiling in better light. His shoes left faint prints on the linoleum. Prints that led straight to the pediatric wing. Inside ICU room 4, Max lifted his head. His ears twitched first, then his nose lifted, drawing in the scent the way soldiers once drew in the sound of gunfire before it came. Evelyn looked up from her chart. "What is it?" she asked softly, but Max was already on his feet, eyes fixed on the door. His growl rolled out low and steady, the kind that made silence vibrate. Down the hall, Raymond was still on the phone with dispatch, requesting records from Beckett's last known address. The storm drowned half his words. Lightning cracked outside, briefly illuminating the empty side corridor, except it wasn't empty anymore. A shadow moved across the frosted glass of the ICU door. Evelyn froze. The handle turned slowly, almost politely. The door opened. The man who stepped inside looked ordinary at first. The clean scrubs, the hospital badge clipped neatly at his chest. But his eyes gave him away. Hollow, restless, familiar. Evelyn had seen that face hours earlier in the photo Raymond had left on her desk. Her breath caught. "Roy Beckett," she whispered under her breath, her voice trembling between disbelief and dread. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His gaze flicked to Samuel, then to the heart monitor, as though measuring how much time he had before someone noticed. His right hand shifted in his pocket, a shape beneath the fabric, long, sharp. Evelyn took a step forward without thinking, placing herself between him and the bed. For a moment, no one moved. Outside, lightning crawled across the sky, turning the hallway into a brief flash of silver. Then, silence. The kind of silence that lives inside storms. Max's growl deepened, rumbling through the small room. His body lowered slightly, muscles coiling, eyes locked, on the man who had haunted every trail, every scrap of evidence, every sleepless night. Beckett's lips twitched, a smile without warmth. And then the lights flickered. Max lunged, The scream of alarms cut through the thunder like a blade through fog. Red lights strobed against the sterile white walls, turning every face into a ghost, every movement into a flicker. Evelyn slammed the code button with the flat of her hand, the sound echoing like a gunshot, and before the words "Code Blue" could even leave her lips, Max had already collided with Roy Beckett, driving the man backward into the wall so hard that the glass trembled in its frame. The knife flashed once under the ceiling light, then clattered to the floor. The two figures crashed in a blur of motion, one driven by desperation, the other by something deeper, something almost sacred, the instinct to protect. Evelyn shouted for help, her voice breaking in the chaos. Max's growl rose from the floor like thunder pulled from the earth itself. Roy swung wildly, his elbow catching the edge of a metal tray, instruments scattered like shards of rain. Somewhere in the storm of sound, someone yelled for security. By the time the first nurses burst into the room, Max had forced Roy to the ground. The man's face twisted in pain and disbelief, not because of the weight of the dog, but because of what was reflected in the animal's eyes. Purpose, not rage, not vengeance, just duty. Evelyn pulled the emergency curtain back, heart hammering, the smell of antiseptic and iron thick in the air. She could hear the faint metallic ring of the fallen knife spinning to a stop near the base of the bed. Then came the uniforms, boots pounding, radios crackling, the thunder of order reclaiming chaos. Raymond appeared in the doorway, soaked from the storm, his sidearm drawn, voice steady even as the world around him fractured. "Don't move," he said, but Roy was already trembling, his hands slick with blood, not all of it his own. His eyes darted between the gun, the nurses, the boy on the bed. "You don't understand," Roy rasped, his voice splintering beneath the noise. "I was saving him." The words hung there, fragile, frantic, absurd, until Raymond's gaze fell on the torn canvas bag spilling open beside him. Folders scattered across the linoleum, fake documents, faded photographs, lists of names. A map traced with red string and ink smudges, and near the top, a single page circled in red. Samuel's name, underlined twice, next to a series of dates and transfer codes. The sight rooted Raymond to the floor. He had seen cruelty before, in war, in alleys, in the hollow eyes of those who thought they were too far gone to be caught. But this was something colder, something systematic. He crouched, picking up one of the photographs. A child's face blurred, eyes wide, a hospital tag at the wrist. His hand tightened until the paper bent. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Justice in that moment wasn't about rules or reports. It was about what stood bleeding on the floor beside him, and what that boy in the bed might have lost if the night had gone differently. "Get him out," Raymond said quietly. His voice was low, but it carried more weight than the alarms. Two officers dragged Roy to his feet, his protests unraveling into incoherent shouts. The words, "I was saving him," dissolved into the sound of rain hitting the roof, into the rhythm of shoes and struggle and guilt that had run out of excuses. When the hallway cleared, the quiet returned. Not peace, but aftermath. Max lay on his side, chest rising too fast, blood darkening the fur along his ribs. Evelyn dropped beside him, her hands shaking as she pressed gauze to the wound. "Easy," she whispered, voice trembling. "Easy, boy." He blinked once, slow, his breath shallow but unbroken. His paw moved slightly, pressing against her wrist, not to push away, but to stay connected. The monitors in Samuel's room continued their steady rhythm, as though unaware of the war that had just taken place beyond the door. Nurses whispered softly in the hall. One wept quietly by the supply cabinet. Even the storm outside seemed to hush, the thunder rolling farther into the hills. Raymond knelt beside them, holstering his gun. His eyes softened as he reached out, fingers brushing the dog's shoulder. "You did good, soldier," he said. It wasn't praise. It was farewell disguised as gratitude, the kind only men who've seen enough loss can give. Evelyn's face was pale beneath the sterile light. Her scrubs were streaked with blood that wasn't hers, her hair plastered to her forehead. "He's losing too much," she murmured. "If we don't move now—" "I'll call the OR," someone shouted down the hall. A gurney squeaked into view, pushed by two paramedics. The hallway flooded again with movement, but this time it was ordered, focused, the rhythm of people fighting to hold on. They lifted Max gently onto the stretcher, wrapping him in white sheets that turned pink where they met his wounds. His head rested against Evelyn's arm, his breath uneven. She leaned closer, whispering something only he could hear. A sound more like a promise than a word. Raymond followed as they wheeled him toward surgery. The corridor lights flickered once, then steadied, throwing a golden haze across the linoleum. Nurses stood aside, some crossing themselves, others simply watching. Because even if they didn't understand what had happened, they understood loyalty when they saw it. Outside, the storm hadn't stopped. It simply moved higher, rolling across the sky like an exhausted tide. The windows trembled in their frames, and the rain streaked down like tears on glass. Raymond lingered at the end of the hallway, watching as the stretcher turned the corner and disappeared into the surgical wing. He looked down at his hands, calloused, steady, and saw the faint trace of Max's blood along the edge of his sleeve. He didn't wipe it away. He just stood there, letting the sound of footsteps fade, the hum of machines filling the air again. On the floor nearby, a nurse bent to pick up something that had fallen from Roy's bag, a broken plastic ID card, snapped clean through. The name Roy Beckett was still visible above the barcode, the edges burned, the photo half melted. She handed it to Raymond silently, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. He slipped it into his coat pocket without a word. Some evidence belonged in reports, some belonged to memory. Then, a faint chime broke through the stillness. Inside ICU room 4, Samuel stirred. His fingers twitched beneath the blanket, and the heart monitor jumped from its steady line to something faster, stronger. Evelyn froze mid-step, turned, and hurried back into the room. The boy's eyes opened, dazed, confused, reflecting the overhead light like morning in a world that had forgotten what morning felt like. His lips parted, voice hoarse but clear, soft as the rain still whispering against the glass. "Where's Max?" Evelyn's breath caught. She glanced toward the corridor where the stretcher had vanished moments ago, then back at the boy. And though she didn't answer, her eyes said everything. Beyond the window, the thunder rolled again. Not angry this time, but distant, fading. As if the storm itself had finally exhaled, the night bled quietly into dawn. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a thin film of silver light that clung to the hospital windows. Inside, the waiting room was still, chairs pushed close, the smell of antiseptic mixing with stale coffee and sleeplessness. Evelyn sat hunched forward, her elbows on her knees, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. 3 hours. That was how long the red light above the surgical door had been glowing. 3 hours of holding her breath. 3 hours of prayers without words. Across from her, Samuel lay curled on the small couch, refusing to sleep unless his fingers could grip the leather collar they had removed from Max before the surgery. It rested in his lap like a lifeline, the metal tag clinking softly every time he shifted. His face was still pale, his small wooden arm pressed against his chest, but his heartbeat, that fragile rhythm they'd once feared to lose, was steady now. Every so often his lips moved soundlessly, as if calling for the friend who had carried him through the storm. The door finally opened. A woman in surgical scrubs stepped out, her hair damp with sweat, exhaustion softening the lines around her eyes. She was the hospital's volunteer veterinarian, a quiet presence who had been called in at the last moment. Her gloves were gone now, her hands trembling slightly as she pulled off her mask. For a moment, no one spoke. Then she exhaled, the faintest smile breaking across her face. "He made it," she whispered. Evelyn's eyes filled instantly, her shoulders shaking as though the air had become too heavy to hold. She covered her mouth, nodding through tears, and somewhere behind her, Samuel stirred, whispering into the silence. "Max?" The woman nodded gently. "He's sleeping, sweetheart. He's going to be just fine." Days folded into weeks. Outside, winter gave way to the fragile warmth of spring. The snowmelt turned the roads to rivers, and the scent of pine and earth began to rise again through the valley. Inside Lakeside Memorial, life crept back into its familiar rhythm. Samuel's strength returned, slow but sure. The bruises faded, the stitches disappeared, and the shadows beneath his eyes softened. Max healed too. His limp, once sharp and uncertain, became little more than a trace, a reminder of a night when loyalty had rewritten fate. He spent his days lying beneath the window of Samuel's room, head resting on his paws, eyes half-lidded but alert. Whenever the boy laughed, a sound that grew less fragile each day. Max's tail thumped once, slow and steady, as if keeping time with a heart that had found peace again. Raymond began visiting more often. He never came empty-handed, sometimes with biscuits tucked into his coat, sometimes with old tales he barely knew how to tell. He spoke softly, as though afraid to disturb the fragile calm the hospital now held. He told Samuel about deserts where the wind never stopped, about men who carried pictures of their dogs instead of medals, about soldiers who found courage in silence. And Samuel listened, wide-eyed, as though each story was a secret the world had forgotten to keep. Evelyn watched them from the doorway one afternoon, a cup of untouched coffee cooling in her hand. There was something in the scene, the boy, the man, the dog, that mended parts of her she hadn't realized were still broken. The laughter echoing through the sterile walls felt almost impossible, yet entirely right. She found herself smiling, not out of habit, not out of duty, but because she had finally remembered how. Then came a quiet afternoon in early summer. The air smelled of rain that hadn't yet fallen. Josie Alvarez appeared at the hospital entrance, her ranger's jacket dusty from the trail, her face shadowed by the brim of her hat. In her hand, she carried something weathered, a photograph, its corners frayed, edges softened by time. She found Evelyn in the courtyard, where Samuel and Max were sitting under the shade of an old oak. "This was buried in the state archives," Josie said softly, offering the photo. "FEMA K-9 Unit, West Line Division. Mudslide rescue 6 years ago." Evelyn took it carefully, her eyes tracing the faded shapes. In the picture, a younger Max stood tall beside a handler in uniform, eyes bright, posture proud, the letters Valor stamped across his collar tag. Below it, the record's notation read, presumed lost in operation. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant sound of Samuel's laughter. Evelyn's thumb brushed over the image, lingering where the handler's hand rested on Max's head. "He found his mission again," she said quietly, "in a way none of us ever expected." Josie nodded once, eyes soft. Maybe some souls just don't know how to stop saving. As summer deepened, so did the lightness in the air. Samuel could run now, his wooden arm tapping gently against Max's fur as they played beneath the oak trees behind the hospital. The two moved like pieces of the same story, one that had begun in rain and ended in sunlight. Evelyn sometimes watched from the bench nearby, her hands folded in her lap, the lines around her eyes softened by the kind of peace that comes after too much loss. Raymond sat beside her most afternoons, a quiet sentinel with tired eyes and a small smile that never fully faded. He said little, but every now and then, his gaze would drift toward Max and Samuel, and his throat would tighten. Perhaps it was pride. Perhaps it was something simpler, the recognition of courage in its purest form. And when the evenings came, when the air turned gold and the light filtered through the leaves like grace itself, Max would lie down beside Samuel, his head resting near the boy's wooden arm. Their shadows would stretch across the grass, merging until you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. The world, for once, felt right. Sometimes the ones who heal us aren't the ones who speak the loudest. They don't ask for medals or names etched in stone. They simply walk beside us, through storms, through silence, through the long road home. And sometimes they carry us when we can't carry ourselves. There are moments in life when the world grows quiet, not because the noise has stopped, but because something within us finally understands. In that silence, we remember what truly matters. Loyalty that asks for nothing. Courage that doesn't need applause. Kindness that doesn't wait to be seen. Some heroes never stand beneath the lights. They walk among us quietly, carrying the weight of others, asking only for the chance to try again tomorrow. And sometimes their hearts beat in fur and breath and quiet devotion, teaching us what love looks like when it no longer needs words. Maybe that's the gift they leave behind, a reminder that gentleness is its own kind of strength, that mercy can heal wounds no medicine ever could, and that hope often arrives not with a shout, but with a steady step beside us in the dark. So if you're listening tonight, hold close the ones who've carried you in whatever form they came. Not every hero wears a badge, and not every story makes the headlines. Here at Healing with Max, we keep their courage alive. Subscribe today so you'll never miss the next untold story of veterans and their Max partners.